Hello and welcome to The Nation. I'm Helen Daly. Well, it has been a week of new lows of hypocrisy and double standards in politics. We had the Alan Jones debacle. Then we had Margie Abbott ferociously defending her softy husband. Well, we knew from those two things that sexism had well and truly reared its head again. But then Parliament resumed this week and both sides seemed to scrape the bottom of the barrel. Did the Peter Slipper saga reveal a side of Australian politics that's always been there? Is this the harsh reality? Or does it show a sign of desperation that hopefully will not stay? Is that going to happen? And do we expect the sort of sexist, offensive language from our nation's leaders? The gender battles have left the trenches and have gone full metal jacket. Well, my all-female panel tonight is going, we think this might be a first, but we're not sure, is going to pick apart the venom politics of sexism. And I'm joined tonight by Julie Collins, the Minister for the Status of Women, Julia Baird, author and Fairfax columnist, Dee Madigan is advertising and communications consultant, and Kelly O'Dwyer, who's a Liberal MP. Thank you all for being with us.
Good to be here.
Let's start with this week. Now, Parliament resumes. Tony Abbott moves a motion to get rid of the Speaker, Peter Slipper, because of the offensive text that he sent to his staffer. Julie Collins, why did the PM defend this man who's in such a high office?
Well, I don't think we're actually defending the man per se, Helen. I think what we were saying was that the Parliament shouldn't be making judgments while this was still before the courts. And indeed, Peter Slipper made his own decision later that afternoon or evening to resign from that position. I think we need to be really careful when things are before the courts about what the Parliament does and doesn't make judgment on at that time. When it comes to Peter Slipper's comments that were the subject of some of the discussion in the Parliament that day, he did come out and apologise. And, you know, their comments were offensive and we said they were offensive.
Shouldn't the PM have cut him loose? Let the court case do its job, but cut him loose from that position, particularly as she was trying to level the sexism charge at Tony Abbott, and here she was defending what most people called a sexist.
We were not defending the comments that he made at all. We said they were offensive.
He's the sexist.
Look, what he said was sexist, absolutely, in the text messages, absolutely. And we absolutely condemn those comments and the text messages that were made. But we were saying that the two issues of the sexism and the Parliament making a judgment on a thing that was before the courts are actually two separate issues. That's what we were saying. And that the Parliament shouldn't be making a judgment till the court had done that. Peter Slipper obviously made his own judgment and then made a decision to resign.
Julia Baird, was it a lack of judgment on the Prime Minister's part not to cut him loose, to essentially defend him?
Well, look, I mean, I understand the rationale that you're giving. I do think it was a good thing that he did go, possibly of his own volition. I mean, I think it's well enough to say that the courts are making, you know, it's a very important, it's kind of a significant case, and it is about a serious sexual harassment allegation. So that shouldn't be cast aside in all of this. And but that probably pertains to whether he should be sitting there at all. I think when you're holding an office like the Speaker, which is a pivotal one in the Parliament right now, I think it is appropriate that he step down. But I think we've conflated a couple of issues as well. I mean, Julia Gillard happened to make an electrifying speech about another issue while she was kind of trying to steer the subject and, you know, trying to not defend the texts, because she said she was clearly outraged by them. I don't think anyone could think that she thought that it was appropriate to talk about women in the way that he did in his text. But in this case, to say it should be left before the courts.
Dee Madigan, do you think the Prime Minister handed the opposition leader a gift by defending Peter Slipper in that way and allowing him to stay in his job, at least for 3 more hours?
No, I think it would have been setting a really dangerous precedent for her to have him step down before it had happened, because then it opens up the case for any minority government, for any member of Parliament to be accused of something and have to step down before due process happens. So I think she did exactly what she had to do.
Kelly O'Dwyer, why did your side suddenly turn on Peter Slipper? You'd all known him, not necessarily you personally. The Liberals had backed him 7 times into pre-selection. You must have known what the guy was like. Why did you turn, unless it was to your political advantage the other day?
Well, there was nothing sudden about it. Peter Slipper was not going to receive endorsement from the LNP in Queensland again for his seat, and we certainly never put him up as the highest office holder in the Parliament as Speaker. This is something that the Labor government...
7 times for 7 elections.
This is something that the Labor government did. We opposed it at the time, so it's not new. knew. We opposed him at the time. We said he was an inappropriate choice for the government to make.
He did make him a parliamentary secretary.
Well, I gave you a go, but we said at the time that it was an inappropriate choice that the government made. We opposed it. We said that there were much better options. We tried at the time, if you remember, to actually appoint the woman who has now become the current Speaker, Anna Burke. We actually thought she was a far more appropriate choice for the government to make. You know, a strong and capable woman. We said that she should be appointed as the Speaker. So it's not news to us that he was not the right choice as Speaker. Now, going to the substance of what has been before us this week, I think, you know, we're trying to confuse the issue here when we talk about the fact that, you know, somehow it's before the courts and therefore the Parliament can't make a decision on whether or not the current Speaker is a fit and proper person to hold that title and to hold that very high office. They preserve the dignity of the Parliament. They need to be a fit and proper person. No one is disputing the text messages that have been now published. Even Peter Slipper did not dispute the vile, obscene, awful, totally unpublishable text messages that were a grotesque affront to all women.
I'm sorry, I actually disagree with that, and I have to say this. I and quite a few women out there, I thought it was tacky, disgusting and horrible, not fine, but I actually don't put them up there. You know, can I say the word, the vagina, a muscle, isn't, in my mind, you know, anywhere near the kind of sexism that you hear from Tony Abbott. And I think the spin that the Coalition is trying to do on this is trying to say, oh, well, look at that, that's awful, so kind of ignore this that's happening. And it's, you know, and I think there's a lot of women out there, and if you listen to a lot of articles written today, we're not super offended.
So
Peter Slipper doesn't find vaginas attractive. So what kind of thing? It is not vile sexism that we've had from Tony Abbott.
I think that's one comment amongst many. I think if you actually, and anybody can do this, they can go on, they can look at all of the comments made, and I think you're undermining the very first point that you made just now, which is that even the Prime Minister, late in the day, said she was offended by these comments.
I was offended.
So
some women were. Some women were.
Either you're offended or you're not offended. Well, you just agreed now with Dee, so I'm not quite sure whether you're offended or not. I was offended as a woman. Going into that Parliament as a woman, having him preside as Speaker, frankly, he should be presiding over the Parliament, preserving the dignity of the Parliament for all parliamentary members. And for the Prime Minister to fail a critical test of leadership where she stood up and instead of actually agreeing to the motion to remove the Speaker, which is entirely within the right of the Parliament. We can appoint a Speaker and we can remove a Speaker. That is entirely within the right of the Parliament to do that. Instead of doing that, what she did instead was launch a bizarre attack, a personal attack, a continuation of the attack that has been running.
But she didn't launch it. Tony Abbott launched it by bringing in sexism. She
you don't need to shout about it, but I mean, she basically stood up there and she knew she couldn't defend Peter Slipper, which is why she didn't bother. That's why she launched this all-out attack.
Kelly O'Dwyer, could I suggest to you, though, that Tony Abbott provocatively repeated that phrase, dying of shame, and that's what launched the Prime Minister in her fairly spirited attack, which I believe has been viewed on YouTube 500,000 times.
Well, look,
so are we missing the point that, in fact, her speech was viewed right around the world as a very significant speech, and the point she was making in that?
Well, the Prime Minister can find whatever fig leaf she'd like to in order to try and justify the speech that she made. But
so
the fact
do you support Tony Abbott repeating that phrase, dying of shame?
The fact is, her speech was not justified under any circumstances.
Can I just ask you about perhaps the provocation was the dying of shame?
Well, I'm answering that by saying her speech was not justified under any circumstances. She was meant to be responding to a motion about sexism, and she says she's concerned about sexism and misogyny, she's concerned about women, and yet she put her leadership to the test. She defended Peter Slipper.
She was not
to remain
defending Peter Slipper.
Well, she
was defending due process.
Every single person on the Labor side of politics voted for him to remain. They said he was a fit and proper person to remain a Speaker. And the reason that the Speaker was no longer Speaker was not because Julia Gillard did the right thing, did the honourable thing, did the thing that most women would expect of her. Instead, the reason he left was because we saw two independents go to Peter Slipper and say, you know what, you've lost lost our confidence.
And that was
you have to go.
And that
you
was
have
the
to
right
go.
way for it to
They
happen.
had the judgment that Julia Gillard did not have.
All right.
They said it was
Julie
not
Collins,
appropriate.
was it a lack of judgment by the Prime Minister, and did she give a gift to the opposition by sticking by him?
As I said, we were not defending Peter Slipper as a person or the
But
comments
that's
that
what
he
the
made.
general community sees from that.
What
They
we were
see that
doing-
you voted for him to stay in that job, and that's a pretty prestigious job.
Absolutely, it is a prestigious job, and absolutely the Parliament standards need to be upheld, and the Speaker's role in that is critical. Absolutely, and I'm not saying that that's not the case. But what I'm saying is there are two issues, and they were separate issues. One was whether the Parliament could make a judgment when an issue was before the court, and whether or not the comments and the text message were sexist. And we said that they were, and we condoned those comments. Absolutely. And in terms of the Prime Minister's speech, I think the Prime Minister actually defended and stood up to some of the comments. I think it is quite right that women in the Parliament, in business, in politics, in journalism, wherever they might be, should stand up to comments that are of a sexist nature or are gender-based.
All right,
I don't think we can stand by and keep letting that happen.
Just before we get on to the speech, Julia Baird, did you have a view about this not being able to separate the issue for the community? They would have seen, oh, there was a vote for Peter Slipper and he got to stay where he was. Why didn't the Prime Minister go to him before the vote, I'll put it to both of you, and say, mate, you've got to go?
I don't know what happened in the machinations behind.
Should she have done that, Julia, in your view?
I think that should she have done that? Probably. And maybe there was that discussion. I mean,
Julie
he ended
Collins,
up going,
should
and
she
it was the
have done that?
independents that had the role in it as well. But yeah, I do think that's separate to the speech, which I'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
I think I don't know what discussions happened prior to that, but what I do know is that Peter Slipper made a decision to resign. I think that was the right decision for him to make, and I think that we've moved on from that. We've elected a new Speaker, and the parliamentary standards do need to be upheld. And I agree with Kelly that Anna Burke is an excellent Speaker, and she will be an excellent Speaker. And you know, the speech, as I said, I think the Prime Minister made what was a very powerful speech. I think it was very heartfelt, and I think that people could tell that it was very, very genuine. Well, I think she was responding to the fact that people were confusing the two issues, and that she was being accused of...
deliberately confused these issues,
She was being accused of defending Peter Slipper's comments and of defending sexism, and she was saying she was not. I stand up against it. I stand up against it,
And
whether
yet
it
she
comes
voted
from
for
Peter
him.
Slipper
All right,
or whether
just
it comes from Tony Abbott.
Julie Collins, keep on that theme, because I asked Kelly before about was it a provocation, Tony Abbott using the phrase, repeating the famous sort of Alan Jones phrase of dying of shame. Do you think that set the Prime Minister off?
Well, I think it was a distasteful comment, and I think that it was an inappropriate comment given what had occurred prior to that, absolutely, because there's no doubt that anybody would have been hurt by the comments that Alan Jones made, and I know that he's come out and apologised, but to actually repeat comments of a similar vein, I think it was
They weren't the
distasteful.
same comments. I mean, they weren't the same.
It was the same phrasing. It was the same phrasing.
The wording of
And
it.
then he
Dying of
denied it. He
shame
denied
is so
remembering the
loaded.
phrase. And there's no way he forgot that phrase.
I struggle actually with the thought that he could deliberately do that, to be honest with you. No, I do, because I think if that was deliberate, that is so mean. For a woman
So you
who's
think
grieving,
he just
that phrase
grabbed that phrase out of the air?
Three times?
yeah, call me naive, but I would.
Well,
I
he
just
did
can't
say he's
imagine
used it
that
many
he would be
times.
so. That is a really foul thing to do for a woman whose husband has died, who's been under. Father has died, who's been under absolutely
But he
enormous
didn't
pressure.
He didn't say.
No, he
that
just
Julia
used the phrase
Gillard
died of shame. But
Father died of shame. He never
just
said no.
immediately-
And the Labor Party have tried somehow to invent this situation.
But Kelly, I don't you think that a lot of people in the community would hear that phrase and think, oh, that
have I heard that
means it's a
before?
sign he's siding with Alan Jones,
No, that was a very
he's
shocking
repeating.
thing to hear. A lot of people were talking about
Tony Abbott,
it.
you want to talk about apologies. Tony Abbott, when he found out about the statement that had been made, he issued a statement immediately condemning the remarks.
Alan Jones,
So
no, he
issued
said
a
that
statement
was
straight away. So, I mean, if you...
It was not
It was
several
several
hours
hours
later.
later.
It was not straight away. It was 2 days
several hours
later, and it was very, very
He
subtle.
was commenting.
No, it
And then
was
he came came out about 5
He
days...
wasn't there.
He said something like it was out of line, or he had a very soft comment on it, and it wasn't until the public outcry went up that he came out 4 or 5 days later and condemned it properly. It is not confected outrage.
That's the phrase that's being...
It's not confected
No,
outrage.
it's
It's
not.
confected because I genuinely think that there is an orchestrated campaign that is being run to use gender as a shield for the Prime Minister to try and...
This is Tony Abbott.
Let me just ask this question of you.
Julia.
Let me ask this question. If it's contrived, if it's confected, if it's artificial, if it's pure political spin, tell me exactly which words the Prime Minister uttered in that speech that she did not mean.
Well, no.
That is the question. If this is not genuine, if she did not mean what she said... No.
She did list dates and places when Tony Abbott said those things.
And that's a really crucial issue because she meant it.
Just a minute. Sorry, Kelly. Julia, finish your point.
No, but I think that is my reaction. Yes, there is a strategy amongst the ALP to paint Tony Abbott as someone who has a woman problem.
Double standard?
But that is different. I think both parties have problems with women.
All right,
I really
sorry,
do.
what, it's different to what?
But that is very different to the speech that Julia Gillard gave, which I think she meant every single word of, and that's why it penetrated. We are not used to hearing women in positions of power making that speech, and we are not. You know why? Because it does usually cost them. Women don't stand up in the middle of workplaces, boardrooms, or cabinet meetings, or in the Parliament to say people are sexist and this is causing damage not just to me but to the community. You know why? Because it costs them votes or it costs them jobs. We're told not to. And to see a woman do it, that's why they're watching around the world. That's why Andrew Solomon is talking about it, and that's why Jezebel's talking about it, and that's why I'm getting emails from all around the world.
The leader of our country has had a moment in the Parliament where, frankly, I think she lost control.
No.
I think she was in an emergency, break glass and hit that gender button.
But she's never outrageous.
It is outrageous. Are you saying that sexist comments should not be stood up to and people should just stand there and...
tell me what you're talking about.
Julia's exactly right. The point is women have spent their whole careers not being able to say it. We haven't been able to say the gender card.
She's never, ever. And I interviewed her about this in 2003.
Abortion is the easy way out. It isn't sexist.
No, but this is a separate issue, actually. I understand what you're saying, and we should talk about that. But there's a separate issue about whether she believed, why she said what she did. And that's the initial question. The other thing is, how do we evaluate that evidence, and do we believe her? That's separate. But she meant what she said, and she's never played what is called the gender card before, ever.
All right, let's hold this thought. We're going to talk more about sexism in politics when we come back from this short break. Stay with us.
G'day, I'm Steve. This is my story.
I'm Tim, and this is my story.
I operate a 4100 shovel.
I've been working since I've been about 7 years old.
Yeah, mining's been good to me.
I'm keen to learn, and I'm ready to work.
Yeah, I've set myself up for life.
I just want to be given a chance. It's all anybody wants, really.
I know a lot of people have been knocked back.
There are two sides to every story. The mining companies are bringing in thousands of temporary overseas workers, yet thousands of Australians are looking for mining jobs. The mining companies don't own the resource, we all do. Let's spread it around. Authorised by Michael O'Connor, CFMEU, West Melbourne.
From creating cutting-edge healthcare solutions that help doctors cure people, to financing and building Australia's businesses, to developing advanced technology which can help move and power Australia. That's the difference 2 letters can make.
The all-new Honda Civic Hatch. Style with substance. And for a limited time, a 1.5% comparison rate.
Unlike an airline, we don't operate out of airports. We don't employ flight captains or crews. We don't own any planes. And we don't play favorites as to who you should fly with. No, our role is to be totally even-handed and present the facts on your many airline choices to weigh up properly and book what's best for you. Webjet.com.au.
You think technology is amazing? Well, if you want to see something really amazing, you need to check out live streaming at Bet365.com. Bet365 is the world's biggest online sports betting company. And if you join now, you can watch over 20,000 live sports events a year. Now that's what I call amazing. Bet365.com, now based in Australia.
Welcome back to The Nation, and we've been discussing sexism in politics. Julie Collins is the Minister for the Status of Women. I wanted to ask you, Julia Baird made a point about in Julia Gillard's slapdown speech. I guess that's what we could call it. That's what many commentators have called it. It was perhaps the first time, Julia Baird thought it was the first time that she has brought up sexism. She hasn't really played this card before. Why this time?
Well, I think that she is responding to a whole series of comments, and the fact that the issue of Peter Slipper was being essentially, compared to or being used for political purposes, and she had said that she didn't agree with his comments and they were being compared to other comments. And I think that, she said enough is enough. We have to call sexism when it happens, and I'm going to do that because, for the women of Australia who put up with it every day, day in, day out, in their workplaces, wherever they might work, that we actually do have to stand up to it. It's not okay, no matter where it happens, and that means it's not okay in the Parliament either.
On that particular day, was it a shield, as Kelly O'Dwyer and the Coalition are saying?
I found the comment that it's a shield outrageous. I mean, I think we should stand up to sexism wherever it happens, and I think that the Prime Minister had every right to. I think the Prime Minister's been very conscious of the fact that she is the first female Prime Minister, and she's been very conscious, I think, to be cautious about how she responds to that.
She has said it before, though, Helen. I mean, this is not the first time. Let's be a little bit real about it. I mean, when she was under pressure to answer questions about her role in setting up an account for her boyfriend at the time.
But that was the media. She was having a go at the media more, Kelly, rather than in the Parliament.
She said that basically anybody who raised these allegations was somehow being sexist.
She stood up for nearly an hour and answered questions in a press conference, Kelly.
I'm trying to just, make a comment here in relation to the comment that you've made, and I think that is quite a dangerous precedent to set, which is that if you want to look at the record or character of an individual and they happen to be female, that somehow you are then going to be attacked as either sexist or, in the case of Tony Abbott, he's been called a misogynist. Now, that is a very serious charge. To say that somebody is a misogynist and they engage in misogynistic behaviour, that says that they are women-hating. Quite frankly, it offends me that we are throwing this term around so easily and so lightly, because there is true vile misogyny that occurs in the world. And I gave a speech in the Parliament just recently about it, about the Pakistani girl who is 14 years of age, who's been shot in the head by a member of the Taliban because she simply wanted to get on a bus to go to school to be educated. Now that is misogyny, and every moment we waste...
Kelly, that is a ridiculous argument.
It
is not to say that because there's worse misogyny somewhere else we shouldn't address it here.
I'm saying that every moment we waste on invented misogyny is a moment we don't actually misogyny. So tell me, what is it that Tony Abbott has done that is misogynistic?
Well, he's made plenty of comments, things like when you make an honest woman of yourself.
That's misogyny, is it?
It's certainly sexist.
So is that misogyny?
It's more than that. Because
I'm not going to get into a debate about the meaning of words and your interpretation versus others.
Because words are powerful. And I think as the Minister for the Office of the Status of Women, you, of all people, need to be very careful about how these charges are level.
I will give you an example. He was asked somewhere about something. Well, will
somewhere about something? Yeah, that's.
Will women be in charge, or women won't be in charge? And he said, "Is that's not a bad thing, is it? About women not being in charge? That is misogyny."
This is part of what Julia Gillard detailed in her speech the other day.
And he's made comments that, you know, women might not have the aptitude to lead or to issue command, and comments like this.
Well, I don't think,
and there's a whole history of them
the fact
written
is
down.
No one's come out. No one's
Kelly,
come out
are you
with
supporting those sorts of?
What I'm saying is that
there were dates and times in the PM speech.
I think that sometimes politics is robust. I think that politics is pretty robust, and people make a lot of comments.
So do you
over
think
a long
women
period
have
of time.
to just put up with
I
it?
don't think.
Do women
not think
politicians just have
is
to put
a
up with it?
misogynistic comment, and I think that it is a very, very
Would
nasty
you agree it's a
vile thing.
sexist comment?
No, what I'm saying is that I think that there are people on both sides of the chamber who probably, from time to time, engage in sexist language.
Okay, so
and what worries
Kelly,
me is the complete
women
double
politicians have to put up with that.
Well, I can tell you now, I don't put up with it, but I also don't claim victim status either.
Okay, now that's
come
what
on,
I'd
that's
really like to respond to. I've studied, I've wasted many years of a PhD about the likes of you both, of female politicians. I went through all of the clippings files, state, federal, all the press galleries, the federal parliament and parliamentary libraries, and I looked at all the occasions in which the term the gender card was used. And unfortunately, it's always used in a way to assume, to prevent a woman from being able to talk about discrimination in any way. And to assume that when you say, well, let's talk about this coverage, is there something sexist in it, that you're therefore saying that your behaviour is impeccable, that you've done nothing wrong, that you're flawless, that you are beyond criticism. And that's actually, that's a very simple way of looking at it. And I think the gender card is the same way the race card is being used to stop, you know, African Americans to talk about racism. And I think the reason why we have a Prime Minister who's not really addressed it before. She's brought it up, she's mentioned misogyny, but not really addressed it in the same way. And the reason why it was so shocking is because people always say the gender card is about being a victim and it will be very harmful. But what she was actually doing in that speech was not claiming victim status, but she was accusing him of being something. And that was I thought that was a very profound shift. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that we have to be careful that every time a woman says, look, you know, I think this person has said some very offensive things, that we don't then say that she's crying foul on any critique of her policies.
Julia, I certainly wouldn't say that, in the sense of saying that, you know, you can never talk about sexism, you can never talk about these issues. I don't for 1 minute suggest that at all. In fact, I set up, along with actually one of your colleagues, Amanda Rishworth, it's a joint parliamentary friendship group for women in maths, science and engineering. And I'll tell you why I did it, because I had a woman who came to me and said that there is a problem with the way that grants are allocated and how you are actually looking at the assessment of the allocation of some of these scientific grants. And I wrote to the Minister several times, received not particularly sensible responses about it, and realised this is actually a genuine issue we need to look at, because there needs to be some flexibility built in here. So I'm not suggesting for 1 minute...
But you did say that politics was robust, and therefore you seem to be implying that you need to just put up with it.
That I do think it's very convenient that in some circumstances there is a big, you know, hullabaloo made about, you know, statements that some members might make or catcalls that some member might make, and in the other exactly similar circumstances, as happened in the House not that long ago, because we had in the Senate a catcall that was made by a coalition member who then immediately apologised for it. We then had the same thing happen, and it took about 45 minutes in the House, firstly for the male member to acknowledge he'd done it, to take responsibility for it, and I demanded an apology because I thought it was offensive.
Right.
And I'm saying there was a double standard because it took a very long time for any member of that front bench to stand up and say
Kelly,
this
don't
is
you
wrong.
think by using a term, using the gender card, it suggests it's a game that's being played?
I do think it's being played like
so do you think that what she said was just a tactic, that wasn't real at all?
I think there is a real tactic that's being
employed. I think women who say women are using...
Do you want me to answer, or do you want me to...
No, it is Dee's point now.
I think where women connected with Julia Gillard's speech the other day is we've spent our whole lives being told we can't play the gender card, we can't play the gender card. And when she got up there and all of a sudden it wasn't about a card hard. It wasn't a game. It was saying this is enough. This is what resonated
And it wasn't
with
her
women.
being a victim.
No,
that was what was crucial. She didn't say, "I feel so bad. This is so awful." And this was like, "I'm offended because these things to me are
not okay,
and it's not okay." And that's why that's why it's gone viral. It's just so unusual. And most people, by the way, you know, who are watching it virally, are not aware of the Slipper politics or the Craig Thompson politics or the hung parliament. They're just seeing a woman ripping into an opponent for sexism. It is unprecedented.
So do you think it really struck a chord out there, not just in Australia, but this worldwide thing? I mean,
yep, I've had lots and lots of emails from the UK and from America about people just saying they just cannot, what is going on? I cannot believe it. And in fact, a friend of mine emailed me this morning, and she'd just been in a boardroom. There were bankers, there were lawyers, and someone was arguing with something, and a woman leaned across the table and said, "I will not have you lecture me on this subject. Not now, not ever." And they all laughed, you know.
Dee Madigan, how will it play out for voters? I mean, it's fine for the chatterati, the commentariat to comment, the New Yorker or the New York Times. What about voters?
What you're hearing from sort of, you know, the male journos is, oh, you know, it didn't cut through and that. And then you hear from the women out there, it did cut through massively. And not the people who are on Twitter necessarily, it's the people out in the burbs. Most of the uncommitted voters are women. So, yeah, I think it'll have an impact, a big impact.
You know, I'm not actually sure how that will play out electorally. I mean, John Della Bosco just said on the ABC that he would have ripped off that speech if he could have, that he just doesn't think it's going to play out. And I think that's going to be interesting because I don't think we've actually got to the point of working out what it's going to mean. But
or is that a male thing versus a female thing?
Right. I think it's even above politics.
Yes.
And this is so maybe whether it translates to votes or not, I think even the bigger issue is the important thing is it got said for both sides, because 60% of Australian women think female politicians are treated badly. Yes. And so that's 60%. So it's their Liberal
I then like the two politicians about the sort of feedback that you've had from your areas about that speech.
You talk about, you know, this is being done for the good of all female politicians. Well, I can tell you now, the last people to stand up when a woman on the Conservative or Liberal side of politics is attacked in a sexist way, the last thing that happens is condemnation from effectively the handbag hit squad that has been sent out to try and attack Tony Abbott in a very orchestrated way. And I think it's important to come back to your point that you raised earlier about, is it just a game, is it a strategy? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, John McTiernan, who has been brought in from the UK to work in the Prime Minister's office, boasted about using this tactic over in the UK elections. He's boasted on his blog about this. He's actually said that gender is an important part of the tactic of trying to elicit
Tony Abbott stood in front of signs saying
response.
Kill
what we are now seeing,
but Abbott was doing the same thing with his wife.
We're now seeing exactly the same tactic that is being employed. It's no accident that the majority of people, until I actually came out and called it a handbag hit squad, the majority of the people who are out there attacking Tony Abbott on gender, you know, with this megaphone diplomacy.
But is that part of your
female front benches?
Kelly, is that part of your tactic to try and blunt an attack on Tony Abbott? And as Julia mentioned, did he use the same sort of tactic by bringing out his wife and girls to help sort of soften his image?
I think it's just a very, very sad reflection on the state of politics right now, that you would see it being used as part of an orchestrated political strategy. I think people actually don't want to be talking about this, and they certainly don't want their parliamentarians to be out there beating up on this issue. I think what they want to see is us talking about the policy issues that affect them, and I think they want to see civility restored to the parliament. Well, they do. They want to see civility restored to the parliament.
All right.
And to be really honest, both Nicola Roxon and Tanya Plibersek, when those comments first were made, were out there talking about policy and other things, and they were asked by a journalist about a photo in a newspaper, and was Tony Abbott's look towards Anna Burke an issue, right? They did not start this commentary out there. They were responding to questions from journalists.
Going on for months. This isn't new. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting this only started in the last week. This has been an orchestrated strategy that has been employed for some time.
Speaking of orchestrated strategies, I mean, Tony Abbott with his wife spent the whole weekend, you know, out new sensitive Tony, and then 2 days later turns up in Parliament. It was kind of the shortest rebrand in history.
Think that one of the issues that people want to talk about, a lot of women feel hasn't been talked about, is sexism. And I actually think there's a good side to both parties saying, you know what, we care about women, we think sexism is unacceptable.
Yeah,
but the one point I do agree with you on, I do agree that politically we have a long, ignoble history of both sides of politics accepting sexism much more readily when it's on their side. And I did notice that really a lot in the US presidential election campaign, the last one. The stuff said about Hillary Clinton was just phenomenal, very, very offensive. And a lot of women across both parties were really troubled. And you realise that we disagree on a lot of things because women have separate brains and they can think for themselves. But one thing that really does affect, that unites women, is we do not like to see one of our own being bullied and being piled on from no matter what party. But then when Sarah Palin got up, I also noticed a lot on the left saying quite offensive and sexist things about her. But, you know, because she was made a laughing stock by a whole group of people, that was then
considered okay.
So that does happen. And I do think that on both sides of politics need to be vigilant about it, you know.
But that's what I'm hoping this speech does. And that's what I was saying before about it being bipartisan. It should just, for all women, make it not okay, the comments that have been allowed in politics from both sides.
But obviously she made it very political because she's aiming it at the leader of the opposition, so it can hardly be a bipartisan.
Yeah, but it raises the bar then, hopefully, for politics on both sides, I think. I think it's sort of, it's addressing...
I just want to get from Julie Collins, what sort of feedback did you get out of your electorate or the people you deal with?
Well, some of the feedback I've had is that people were really pleased that the PM actually stood up to the comments and that she's actually labelled them for what they are, and the fact that she has actually, you know, quoted Mr Abbott time and time again, as you said, Helen, with the dates and the times of these consistent quotes, and there are over 3 decades of quotes that all have a similar theme about him commenting on women.
All right, the two of you
in 3 decades.
Okay, sorry, the two of you who are in politics, the sorts of sexism that were in the Peter Slipper texts, has that always been there? I mean, and maybe it's there in business, maybe it's there in journalism, maybe people are writing sort of disgusting texts to each other.
I think certainly there is sexism in every workplace, and I don't think Parliament House is any different. And I think that is what's important about finally standing up to some of it, and for people to actually say it's not okay from either side of politics, it's not okay from anybody, and if people are going to be sexist, we should call it for what it is. If people are going to make comments that are offensive, that are sexist, we should say so.
But it's just rubbish. I mean, this idea that Tony Abbott is sexist is just a rubbish statement. I mean, you have people, the independents, who frankly, you know, aren't great friends of Tony Abbott. They've joined with the government. They've actually supported the government. They even supported the government in supporting Peter Slipper, and then realised what a terrible mistake that was, and they decided to actually tell him to get out because he wasn't a fit and proper person. But even they reject this ridiculous statement that somehow Tony is a misogynist.
Sorry, two white middle-class, middle-aged men are not calling Tony Abbott sexist.
I mean, you talk about personal experience. I mean, I've had quite a number of personal experiences with Tony and his wife Margie. You say, look, she's been rolled out just recently. Well, I can tell you, Tony Abbott had a decision to make when he was not long ago in Melbourne, and he could either go back home, see you know, and his constituents, or he could stay in Melbourne and come along and see a social enterprise in my electorate. And he spent his Saturday morning with Margie and me talking about homelessness, talking about this social enterprise.
What has this got to do with him being sexist?
No, but your point is that all of a sudden Margie's been rolled out, all of a sudden, you know, this is a new Tony. I'm saying it's a consistent Tony. Tony has not...
But Margie has never made a public speech before. Even Tony Abbott said that.
No, that's
when
true. She hasn't made a public speech. But what I'm saying is there is a consistency in Tony's behaviour. There's not a newfound interest.
This was a new strategy, him having Margie come out, and deliberate to soften his image. Of course it was a strategy.
There did seem to be a marking in the polls that was going against him that brought up this whole problem
Margie,
with women.
Frankly, and I think you really ought to apologise for that, because that's basically saying Margie's just a pawn of her husband.
No, I'm saying it's a strategy. I didn't say she wasn't part of that strategy.
Has been used to somehow some puppet of Tony Abbott.
I didn't say a puppet.
You know, Margie Abbott is a very educated, thoughtful woman.
She said herself she wanted
the attacks on
to
her
be part of
husband,
it,
and she came out to talk about the man that she has been married to
that is
24 years, who has been raising
a very good father. That doesn't mean he's not sexist.
No. Well, that's then saying that Margie Abbott, for 24 years, has been married to a sexist.
But Kelly O'Dwyer, do you accept that there could be... Of course, nobody questions that he would love his wife and he loves his girls and he gets on extremely well with his chief of staff. That wasn't what they were questioning. And, of course, Margie Abbott has seen that side of him. Do you accept that the Prime Minister was allowed, in her speech, to detail what she has seen as sexist comments from him? That's what she's experienced. You're saying it's a rubbish statement,
I think it's a rubbish statement,
what she
and I'll
has
tell you why,
experienced hearing from his mouth,
you know, I think
hearing from him.
If somebody genuinely feels something, then they respond at the time and they say it. I think that what has happened here is we're seeing desperation politics. We are seeing distraction politics 101, and we are seeing gender being used in this way. And I think that is a very sad state of affairs.
All right,
I know
just very quickly, because we're going to go to an ad break.
Feminists in the Liberal Party who would probably vow to the death that Tony Abbott's not a misogynist or even that he's not sexist, but they would say that the things he said, women by physiology and temperament not really adequately equipped for leadership, is a sexist thing to say. And I know they object to it because I've spoken to them. This is not exclusive to the Labor Party. And we should be having a discussion about, are women equipped to lead the country? Are they equipped to be members of Parliament? If so, then he either misspoke or he regrets it. And that's a different conversation.
Tony Abbott actually was on the record in saying he thought it was a great thing that we had our first female Prime Minister. He thought it was a great thing we have our second female Speaker. So I think this idea that Tony somehow has a problem with strong, capable women is, again, this very manufactured line that's being trotted out as part of a political strategy and a political ploy.
Did he not say the comments that the Prime Minister listed, though?
Absolutely.
But we need an explanation. Kelly, did he say that those things?
Well, I don't know. I didn't say a list.
Well, you said they were rubbish, but now you're saying you don't know that they were rubbish.
I'm saying that what is rubbish is this strategy that's being applied.
You have made that point. We do have to take a break. We're going to be back with more of The Nation in just a moment. Stay with us.
Hello. I'd like to tell you about Bet365.com, the world's biggest online sports betting company. The reason why they're the world's #1 is very simple. They do great odds on a massive choice of sports. And guess what? Bet365.com is now based in Australia.
We're gonna need a bigger boat. Get on board for Hogspread's Great Lobster Fest. Lobster prime rib, just $39.90. Don't get caught out. Limited time only.
Everything you could possibly need for your outdoors is right here at the lowest prices.
Outdoor bistro blind, just $88. Raised garden bed, $99. Garden gloves, only $166. Lowest prices are just the beginning.
Whether you're a butcher or a banker, a dairy farmer or a designer, whoever you are, whatever you do, at Holden we'd like to thank you for many years of support. So now, you're one of us. We're proud to offer Holden's employee discount to all Australians, but you'd better be quick, it ends this weekend. Pay what Holden employees pay on a huge range of new Holdens, including Barina, Captiva, Colorado 4x4 and selected Commodore and Cruise models. You're one of us. Holden's employee discount ends this weekend.
Big businesses can't just think about themselves.
Businesses can only succeed if their communities do too.
They need to think about us. We want opportunity.
At Chevron, we invest in the community to improve education, people's health.
We want a future.
Create jobs and raise the standard of living. After all,
this is our community.
It's my community too.
Yes, punters, welcome to the world of Sportingbet.
At Sportingbet, we live and breathe sports and racing. It's what we do, day in and day out. That's why we're the punters' favourite, providing top odds and unique promotions on a huge range of markets. And our cutting-edge technology means you can bet anywhere, anytime. So if you're into sports and racing as much as we are, go to sportingbet.com.au today, because there's no better bet than a sporting bet.
Welcome back to The Nation, and I'm being joined by an all-female panel, and we have been talking about sexism in politics. Julie Collins, I wanted to ask you, Tony Abbott made the point, and Kelly has sort of reiterated that tonight, that just because Julia Gillard has been at times unfairly criticised, they were his words, doesn't mean she shouldn't be criticised at all, that she can dismiss all or any criticism. That's a fair point, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a fair point. I mean, in politics, of course, debate is robust, and debate can be robust, and it should be about policies, or it should be about a person's ability to do their job, and it should not be of a sexist nature. And I think that that's the difference between what we're talking about here. I think that, you know, politics can be robust, but I don't think that it should get to the point where the comments are gender-based.
We seem to have seen a huge amount of hypocrisy. I'll play devil's advocate and say there's been hypocrisy on both sides. Julia Gillard for criticising Tony Abbott's sexism and then backing Peter Slipper to stay in that job when he's been deemed a sexist. Tony Abbott for provocatively repeating the dying of shame term, and for his side saying that they would accept Peter Slipper's vote now that he's on the other bench, yet accusing the government of accepting the tainted vote of Craig Thomson. Then the Liberals sending a letter to Craig Thomson asking for his vote, and Craig Thomson coming out when he should perhaps be in a dark corner. It's all a bit much. Where should it stop, Julia Baird? And do you think the hypocrisy will stop, or is that just a part of
from next week
politics?
We should have a clean, very civil parliament. Everyone should be nice to each other. All the women should be treated very well. In fact, promoted on the Tuesday would be lovely.
And do you think that will happen?
No, I think it was ever thus. And I think that hung parliaments, you know, don't summons people's inner angels. And, you know, the devil's been making a lot of deals over the past couple of years, and we will continue to see that.
Do you think that's why this is happening? Is it the minority government?
Yes.
Or is it, as Tony Windsor said the other night in an interview, because we have a woman Prime Minister?
Oh, yes, I agree with that. No, that was a separate question.
Sorry, that's about sexism, not about hypocrisy.
The question he was asked was why, and there has been a really strange feeling, like, you know, in all my conversations with my female friends, like, what is going on at the moment with women, with the way they're being talked about and what's been unleashed? And there's a lot of really foul things that are being said, but there's also kind of like suddenly, you know, a lot of feminists or a lot of people on Twitter are flexing muscle, and there's been a real fight, and it's been hard to get a grip on why now, what is going on?
I think, you know, why now, what's going on? I mean, that's a great question, but let me just remind you that Mark Latham was very regularly referring to people in the most vile terms, including women. He referred to one of your fellow journalists as a skanky hoe, and that's just one of many vile phrases that he came up with. And he was actually elected.
Yes, that's
after
true.
that as Labor leader.
There are many
examples about the fact that he'd broken.
There are legion examples on both sides.
But this is what we should try to take from this. We should try to say, good, great. Have we all now agreed sexism's unacceptable? You shouldn't say it, shouldn't do it, done. Is grubbiness unusual? No. Hypocritical behaviour? No. Wheeling and dealing? Look, this is why we're so disillusioned and we don't belong to political parties anymore. We see too much of that kind of behaviour.
I mean, that's sort of a bit of a false statement.
No, but every time you say that this is a gender card, then you are diminishing the right of a woman to stand up and say, this is unacceptable to me. No. Women should be able to do that without having you say, you're trying to excuse all of my behaviour.
But we're going one beyond that, because we're not just simply talking about Prime Minister who has said, you know, on one occasion or two occasions, look, you know, I don't accept this or that. You know, we have seen her employed as part of a board of
that is simply not true.
With the word misogyny. I mean, let's talk about that, because being a misogynist is actually a very serious charge, and we were talking about this before.
Yes.
And you yourself said you were uncomfortable with how it has been deployed and thrown
I think we have to be very careful with it, because it is a hatred of women, and there are a lot of people who are very sexist. Look, sexism often springs from misogyny, but yes, I do think we have to be careful, and I do think it's important to talk through the evidence and say what we're happy with and what we're not. And I think it should be cross parties. I might be dreaming, but you know, a lot of this is not coming from what I'm sensing outside the Parliament. A lot of it doesn't seem to be particularly partisan to me, to be honest with you. I'm getting emails from people from all parties about it.
I'm getting feedback from women who follow nothing at all about politics, and yet there's sort of
something
has resonated because it is permission to say it's not okay, and we haven't had that. Because I think we grew up in an era where feminism was almost a dirty word. It was always associated with kind of the militancy, you know, kind of thing, and you didn't want to identify with it if you were kind of a feminine girl. And now you realise actually feminism is just saying we just want to be treated equally, and it's not okay to be put down because we're women.
Equally, I think that's the point. Equally, I mean, I'm a very proud feminist, and I think I should be treated equally.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have any special privileges, but nor should I have any impediments placed in my way. But you know, I mean, again, I think there is an opportunity for us to go to the substance, to go beyond, you know, the Prime Minister simply talking about the fact that, you know, she doesn't want to look at her record. I think we can actually look at some of the record. If we actually want to talk about some of the issues that are important to women, we should start discussing those issues around the childcare rebate, the fact that it has been cut, the fact that the indexation has been frozen, the fact that it is becoming harder for women to go back to work.
We came to office,
well, no, it's been cut from over $7,800 to $7,500.
Can I ask you a question as a female politician? Don't you think that female politicians are treated worse than male politicians? Do you honestly believe they're not?
I think every individual is treated differently.
So you do not think that gender comes into it? You don't think that female politicians get a little bit tougher than males?
I think that it depends on the individual. I think
you don't think it's gender at all?
Some people are treated differently to other people, and it often is a reflection on the way that
so
those
Kelly,
people
are you actually
interact.
saying there's no sexism in politics against female
the
politicians?
one point I would agree with Julie on is that there is sexism in every work environment, probably,
but in
politics. Including in politics, and there are some people, you know, there are some people.
What examples have you seen?
Well, look, I'm
Parliament.
In Parliament, well, I think the cat call in Parliament was a very good example of that, and I was quite unhappy that members of the Labor front bench, particularly the Minister for Social Inclusion, Tanya Plibersek, said nothing. It took 45 minutes for the Prime Minister to actually come to the dispatch box and repudiate it, and I think that was a terrible double standard, huge hypocrisy, and that's why I sort of think this sort of moral indignation.
But do you both agree that there is double standards on both your houses?
I would say there's definitely sexism on both sides. There's no doubt about that. But I think what we're saying is that over time, Tony Abbott has certainly displayed, and the Prime Minister's listed all of the incidences of his comments that have been sexist, and she is saying he wants to be leader of this nation, and I'm going to call it when you say it. And that's what's happened. It happened, you know, again, it just keeps happening and happening. And some of the comments go back to, you know, 1979 or 1980 or whatever, and some of them are as recent as this year. Like, it's a pattern of comments over many decades where he has said things like women are not fit to lead. And, you know, we've heard a whole range of them, and it is definitely a pattern. And I think, you know, this person's putting themselves up as the alternative Prime Minister, and I don't think that he should be allowed to get away with continually making comments that are of a sexist nature.
Julia Baird, you have looked at this in a big way for your PhD. Do you think, can you tell whether politics is angrier, uglier and more sexist now? I mean, Peter Hartcher and other commentators have said, oh, you know, you have to remember the kind of rude and funny but, you know, offensive comments that Paul Keating made, or Mark Latham. We've just remembered some of those, or really probably on both sides. But do you think it is uglier and perhaps more sexist now?
Look, I'm studying the Victorian age at the moment, and those parliaments were really ugly and really nasty, and they all gave 3 to 5 hour speeches, which would have been a nightmare.
That would have been the ugliest part of it.
So no, it is the nature of the political brawl. But you know, and having our first female Prime Minister is a great thing for women, but it also has brought out, you know, from whichever party, but it has brought out a bunch of demons in the community. And I think that she's kind of made a call on it. And I'm glad that we're having a discussion about sexism. She's going to be hammered for it. You know, she's going to be criticised relentlessly for this.
She's also distracting from her...
No, not distracting. The sexism motion was on that. And you tell you what, if she's distracted, so is everyone else. Because the things that are being said about her... I mean, I just looked at one site, the CNN report today about her speech. Oh, she was having a hot flush. She lost emotional control. I mean, I think that at some point you have to say enough. Let's talk about this. This matters. And if we think as a democracy that we want the full and equal participation of women, then we need to talk about attitudes that prevent them, impede them, obstruct their way to that. Half of your cabinet and your benches should be women. And if that's not the case, then we should be talking about why not.
And we
what
actually
things are
almost
being
have
said.
50% in the Senate are Labor women. So we're getting there.
But we shouldn't be impeded through the gender lens from actually talking about someone's record. Now, Julie Gillard,
everyone thinks that. That's exactly
apparently
right.
we're not allowed to talk about the fact that Julie Gillard made a statement before the last election saying there wasn't going to be a carbon tax, and then
You talked about it. You've talked about it. She hasn't said you can't talk about that with me because she hasn't talked about it.
They're not exclusive criticism and scrutiny, and this is one of the biggest issues here, which is, she has a very, very poor record. I mean, she doesn't want to be talking about the finances of this country. She doesn't want to be talking about the 100.
We do want to talk about it. We're happy to talk about it. We talk about it every day.
Black coal. She doesn't want to talk about the fact that the government has only delivered deficits that have now added up to over 170
Aren't we the strongest economy now in the world?
We're happy to talk about it. We're also happy to talk about all of our achievements for women. We're happy to talk about Australia's first paid parental leave scheme. We're happy to talk about increased payments for family benefits. We're happy to talk about the increase to childcare benefits. I have had 3 children. When I had my first 2 children, and there was a Liberal government in for 12 years, I received no assistance with childcare until my last child was 6.
Did you get a baby bonus?
No.
Oh, well, you clearly didn't have your baby during the
started so early. Right? No, I did. I know I did. My last son was born in 2002, so I did.
You would have received the benefit, though, and your children will have received the benefit of the fact that they weren't born into debt. Children being born today are being born into debt, and that is going to have a very long legacy issue.
There has been a GFC. Our economy is one of the strongest in the nation.
Isn't our economy the first one, will be the first one back into the black after the GFC?
But listen, I just think the point has to be made, then they're not mutually exclusive topics. It is one thing that we can talk about. It was one speech in Parliament amongst hundreds, thousands. It doesn't cancel everything out. It's not an excuse.
All right.
And it's been great.
Can the standards be lifted, Dee? Do you think they will be?
I think this speech is a circuit breaker. I think women in politics now will be okay to say, look, I can say this is not okay. It is not playing the gender card. It is just not okay.
So you don't think, as some people have suggested, that on both sides it could lead to talk of leadership changes, that Tony Abbott isn't on as safe ground as perhaps he has been because he has this supposed problem with women, and Julia Gillard may not be on safe ground because of the question about her leadership.
They both have gender gaps, don't they?
They both
have gender gaps, as in, more women favour Gillard than men, and more men favour Abbott than women.
I don't know how that's going to play out. Are we just noticing that for the first time? Has that been with other leaders in the past?
Does that mean that Julie Gillard has got a problem with men? I mean, if we're going to draw those sorts of conclusions...
She hasn't said the same comments about men that Tony Abbott has said about women.
We've now started where we're going back to where we started, so it's a very good time to say that's all we have time for in the nation. I want to thank my guests, Minister for the Status of Women, Julie Collins, Julia Baird, author and Fairfax columnist, Dee Madigan, communications specialist, and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Thank you, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.